If you want to pass the GED math exam, you need to know what to study. Luckily, all of math is not on this test. You only need to master a limited number of specific skills. In this video, I'll finish laying out exactly what you need to know to score 145 and pass the GED math exam. This is the fourth and final video where I'm going over everything you need to know in the 4 categories of math skills that appear on the GED math exam. Those are operations with rational numbers, geometry and measurement, expressions and equations, and graphs and functions. Check out the playlist above to learn what you need to study from those first 3 sections. In those videos, I also go more in depth about creating a strategy to study for the math test, so you'll want to check them out if you missed them. Today I'm going to go over a high-level view of what you need to know from that 4th section, graphs and functions. Having a better idea of what you're trying to study can help you focus your attention on the best resources for you. There are 7 skills in particular that you'll need to focus on. In the last video, we talked about expressions and equations, and today we're going to continue on with more algebra skills. In order to successfully use all the skills in this section, you need to have an understanding of the fact that equations are just one way to represent a specific numerical relationship. A relationship that can also be represented in a number of other ways, including graphed on a coordinate plane, as a table of values that make the equation true, or as a description of a situation that can be modeled by that equation. So with that in mind, skill number 1 is being able to compare linear and quadratic functions that are represented in different ways. Linear functions are the ones that look like this, where their graph is a straight line. The equation can be written in this format, y equals mx plus b, and the difference between the values in the table have a constant rate of change. Quadratic functions are the ones that look like this, with a variable to the 2nd power. The graph of the function makes this kind of U shape called a parabola, and then the rates of change on these are not constant, but the second rates of change are. You should be able to look at 2 linear or 2 quadratic functions represented differently and compare them to answer questions, usually about pricing rates. Skill number 2 in this section, you need to be able to plot points on a coordinate plane. The coordinate plane is this thing here that we sometimes just colloquially call a graph. The vertical line is the y-axis and the horizontal line is the x-axis. Any point that appears on the coordinate plane has an address that we call coordinates that tell you where it is in relation to these axes. Coordinates always look like this, x comma y. The first number is how far left or right the point is, and the second number is how far up or down it is, just like when you play Battleship. Plotting a point on the coordinate plane just means taking the coordinates and using them to find where the point should be on the coordinate plane. Skill number 3, you need to be able to graph linear functions on a coordinate plane. Luckily, linear equations are easy to graph if you know the secret. When they're written in this format, y equals mx plus b, the number in the m spot is the slope of the line, and the number in the b spot is the y-intercept, or the place where the line crosses the y-axis. So as an example, for the equation y equals 3/4 x plus 2, the y-intercept is on the 2, and you can find another point on the line by using the slope. Slopes always tell us how far up we should go in relation to how far over we've gone. A good way to remember this is it's always rise over run. So for this one, every 3 we go up, we have to go 4 over. And then once you have 2 points, you can just connect the line. Sometimes the equation will be written in standard form instead of slope-intercept form, so it's helpful if you're able to solve the equation for y so that you can see the slope and the y-intercept more easily. By the way, if this has been helpful to you so far, please press that like button and subscribe so that you can get more tips on how to prepare for the GED exams. Okay, so related to skill 3, skill 4 is that you need to be able to determine the slope of a line from an equation, from a graph, or from a table of values. So before we mentioned that if you have a linear equation in this format, the slope is always the coefficient of the variable, or this number right here. If you have a graph of a function, you can pick 2 points on the line and count up and over. The slope is always the change in y over the change in x, or the rise over the run. If you have a table, you can find the difference between 2 y values in the table over the difference between 2 x values. This formula is on the formula sheet, so you don't have to memorize it, you just have to know how to use it. Skill 5. You need to be able to write an equation given the slope of a line and a point from the line, or given 2 points from the line. If you have 2 points from the line, again, you can use them to find the slope using the slope formula, which is on the formula sheet. Then, depending on how the multiple choice answers are set up, you can either use the point slope formula, which is also on the formula sheet, to substitute in the x and y values of one of the points and the slope, or you can use the slope-intercept form to also substitute in the point and the slope and then solve for the b value. If you're not super confident in solving like this, you can use the trick that we talked about in the last video. You can substitute the points into the multiple choice options and see which ones make the equation true. If the line contains both points, both will make the equation true. I'm not sure that this would be a faster way to find the answer, but it should work. Skill number 6, you need to be able to identify parallel and perpendicular lines using slope. The trick here is that parallel lines have the same slope. This means they go on forever the same distance apart and never touch. So again, if we're looking at the equations in this format, it's this number here that's multiplied by the variable that tells you the slope. And if it's in another format, you can always solve it for y so that it's easier to see the slope. Perpendicular lines cross to make 90-degree angles, and their slopes are always opposite reciprocals of each other. The product of reciprocal numbers is 1, and it's easy to identify them because they have the same numbers just flipped upside down. And remember that the denominator of a whole number is always 1, so the reciprocal of 5 is 1/5. And then opposite means that one of the numbers will be positive and one of the numbers will be negative. So if one slope is 2/3, the perpendicular slope would be -3/2. Skill number 7, you need to be able to identify functions. The rule for functions is that every input has one and only one output. So for every x value in the function, there's only one y value. Looking at tables, you want to make sure that if there are any repeats in the x column, they don't have different numbers for their y value. Graphs of functions need to pass the vertical line test, where a vertical line drawn through the graph of the function would only pass through it one time. If a vertical line could cross through more than once like this, it's not a function. Okay, so those are the 7 skill groups under the graphs and functions category that you'll need to know to score 145 on the GED math test. There are other skills in this category that you could master to get a higher score, but you don't need to pass. If you want to improve these skills, I've mentioned before that although there's no specific GED practice on Khan Academy, it is my favorite place to practice these types of math skills. I'll also put a link to the Kaplan GED prep manual, or you could use any prep manual that your library has available to borrow. It's helpful to start practicing with the calculator you're allowed to use on the test, so I'm going to link that below. And as I've mentioned, there's some helpful formulas on the formula sheet, so I'll put that below there as well. I post new videos every Monday about how to study more effectively so that you can achieve your goals. In the coming weeks, I'll be talking about what you need to study to pass the other 3 GED subject tests, so please subscribe if you want to learn more. You can also go back and watch the first 3 videos in this series about passing the GED math exam. If this video is helpful to you, please press the like button so that YouTube knows to share it with other studiers. Thanks as always for watching, and until next time, happy studying.